All right, hello everybody. This is Elena from Mirrix Looms, and welcome to our Talking Tapestry webinar. Today I am here with our special guest, Claudia Chase, who is the CEO of Mirrix Looms, and Rebecca Mezoff, who is a tapestry weaver extraordinaire and a teacher, and she also has an amazing online class that you guys are going to hear about later. So right now I'm just going to talk about some of the basics and what we're going to cover in this webinar. First, we are going to talk about what tapestry weaving is. We're going to talk about a brief history of tapestry weaving, which is incredibly fascinating. We're going to talk about why a Mirrix loom is a good choice for tapestry. We're going to go over some tapestry resource information. That will include books and things like classes, but we're also going to go a little bit more in depth about Rebecca's online class. And then we're going to get to a really fun part. We're going to answer some of the questions that you guys asked. Now, we have hundreds of participants, so we did not get to all of your questions. Some of them, we got a lot of questions about the same thing, so we tried to lump a couple of those together. And we also picked out some specific questions to answer. I will go through and see if there are some other questions I can answer, but as I said, via email, but as I said, we have lots and lots, so you may not get your question answered. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can email them to us and we will answer you via email after the webinar. And remember that this webinar will be recorded for viewing later. Okay, let's get started. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is about the Mirrix loom and tapestry. This webinar is put on by us at Mirrix Looms. We are a tapestry and bead loom manufacturer. We make portable metal looms. They were invented by Claudia 19 years ago, actually. And it was because she was a professional tapestry weaver and she was looking for a high quality loom that was also portable. And that is what our looms are. So I'm just going to answer a couple questions of why choose a Mirrix for tapestry weaving. The first reason is because of quality. Mirrix looms are meant to last a lifetime, and they really do. Kind of going off that, they also have a really great tension. They're made of metal. They have a really good tensioning system. And tension is one of, if not the most important thing in tapestry and aspect of a tapestry loom. The other is the size options. So our looms start at 5 inches wide and they go to 38 inches wide. So there are a lot of options there, and there are a lot of options for a portable tapestry loom. So even if you have another floor loom, you might want a smaller Mirrix to take places with you. Another one is versatility. Mirrix looms are tapestry looms, and that was what they were first invented for. But they're also bead looms. A lot of people weave beads and fiber on our looms. People weave metal wire. Some people weave paper. I mean, there are a lot of options. So when you get a Mirrix, you don't just get a tapestry loom. Another one is the Mirrix shedding device. I know many of you already have Mirrix looms and you love your shedding device. It makes weaving tapestry so much faster and easier, and you will love it. And we also have an electric treadle and a manual treadle to make the shedding device even easier to use. So you can learn more about those things on our website. Kind of piggybacking off that a little bit, we have many different accessories for our looms. So we have a stand, we have a treadle, there are lots of options, little kits, little things to add to your looms. So you can do different things. Another one is our looms are made in America, and they're not only made in America, they're made in a really amazing place. called Sunshine House, which is in Door County, Wisconsin. And Sunshine House employs mentally and physically disabled Door County citizens. And those are the people that make our looms. So they are made with such love and care, and they're giving supported employment to people who really need it. So it's a really great place. And the Mirrix community. So we have a wonderful community of weavers who own our looms, who talk on social media, who participate in events. You know, if you have a question and we can't answer it, there's always somebody there who can, which I think is really important. And also customer service. You know, we try really, really hard to treat our customers like family, because they really are a part of our Mirrix family. So when you buy a Mirrix loom, you're not just getting a support when you buy it. You are also getting support throughout your experience. Okay, so now let's get to the fun part. We are going to talk to Rebecca about her class and online learning. So Rebecca, I am going to give the floor to you.
Hello. Thank you all for letting me join in your webinar. I have been working with Mirax a little bit since I found out about your loom, I don't know how many years ago now. I just think they're awesome. So I teach tapestry workshops all over the United States, but I have in the last year been teaching online. And my beginning tapestry techniques workshop is called Warp and Weft, Learning the Structure of Tapestry. And the goal of it is to give you the foundational skills you need to make the images you're interested in tapestry. And of course, that can be something different for all of us. I also have a new class starting October 5th for people who have a little more experience in tapestry called Color Gradation Techniques. But I am most interested in helping people learn good tapestry skills because it's such an amazing medium. I mean, where else do you make the artistic image at the same time that you create the form itself? And I think in that way it's a little bit like sculpture, actually. And the best thing about the online classes is that you can do them from anywhere. If you have an internet connection, you can do them in your pajamas if you want. And you can take all the time you need, which I think is important with tapestry. It's a really slow technique. It's a really slow medium. And so if you have several months to work through the exercises and get feedback, it's really helpful. So the class is called Warp and Weft, Learning the Structure of Tapestry, and you can find it on my website. How's that, you guys?
Awesome.
That's great.
Okay, so now we are going to talk to Claudia about the history of tapestry.
Hi, everyone. If any of you have been following my blog in the last month or so, I've been writing posts about the history of tapestry. Ultimately, I would like to cover just about every culture that has had tapestry in it. And the thing is that most cultures did have tapestry at one point. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of tapestry right now because it is something that completely and totally fascinates me. First of all, it's the oldest form of textiles and the principal means of creating pictures through weaving. It's been around for, I don't know, about 3,000 years. I bet it's been around longer. We just haven't found the fragments to prove it. Examples. Let me throw some examples out to you of tapestries that have been in past cultures. You know those magic carpets that you always thought could fly from Persia? Those are tapestries. The finely woven images of the Coptics, which I am completely fascinated with. I'll get into that a little bit more later. The Incas' striking symbolic imagery. Our own nation's Navajo and Pueblo tapestries, long tapestry tradition. Medieval and Gothic European tapestries to the Renaissance and beyond. And North Africa has its own history of geometrical kiln weavings, which are tapestries. Tapestry is not a new medium, even though I think everybody who discovers it, now thinks they've discovered something new. It is said that, okay, in my opinion, modern tapestry weavers cannot even compete with the finest and most intricate tapestries that were woven in ancient times. If you go back and look at some of these, you see that the techniques have not really changed, nothing's changed, and yet maybe they had more time to do it then. They weren't on the internet all the time, and they were able to create these amazing pieces. And I'll give you a good example of that. I found an image of a fish that was woven in Egypt by the Coptics somewhere between the 3rd and 6th centuries. When I look at that fish, and I stare at that fish a lot, there is not a technique in there that has not been used in modern times. And the colors are absolutely amazing. So somewhere between the 3rd and 6th century, they were weaving tapestries as fabulous as some of the tapestries we're weaving today, which makes it a very interesting art form. There was a saying a long time ago that painting is the poor man's tapestry. Such a saying would mostly fall on deaf ears today, but send your mind back to the First Crusades in the 11th century, where tapestries would have been the most prized silver, not gold, tapestries. That's what they wanted to steal. Or medieval times, where a castle was not a home without its walls covered with tapestry for both warmth and beauty. Plus, the kings, when they decided to go to battle, would always take a few tapestries with them to line their tents. I don't know, maybe to show everybody else how rich they were, but maybe just to keep warm. So many factors influence tapestry, but because color is my obsession, the ability to dye materials for weft, for me, defines the progression of tapestry in any given culture. For example, in the West, the color blue was hardly used at all in textiles until the 13th century, when the woad plant was discovered to be a good source. Material used for tapestry has varied among cultures. Wool, linen, silk, cotton, alpaca, camel hair have all been used for warp and weft. But the variety within those categories is huge and would require its own webinar to address. Lane, can we do that sometime?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay, so let's talk about what is a tapestry. What defines a tapestry? There are 3 things that I believe, and I think most people believe, define a tapestry. First of all, the wefts, the threads you weave with, are woven between the fixed warp threads, the ones that are on the loom, only as far as each color is required, versus being woven from selvage to selvage. Even in a Navajo rug, where you perceive that they've woven a series of thick stripes, in fact, the weft only travels maybe 5 or 6 inches, and never from selvage to selvage. The other thing, the warp threads are completely covered by the weft. And that is because, for the third thing, a tapestry has a clearly defined and detailed image. And you think of the warp as a canvas and the weft as the paint. And therefore, you don't want the canvas, the white canvas, to be showing through. So those 3 things, discontinuous wefts, warp threads are always covered, and tapestry is about imagery. And that is that.
That is that. So here, if you can see on your screen, we were having some difficulties at the beginning with actually showing the presentation. I'm not sure what went wrong there, but it should be working now. You can see we have 3 tapestries here. One of these is Emergence 2, that's by Rebecca Mezoff. The next one's Sunset, an old tapestry by Claudia, and another untitled one by Claudia. And I just thought these were good examples of kind of how different tapestry can look while still being within those bounds of what tapestry is. Okay, so now we're going to go on to questions from all of you. So this is kind of going to be the heart of the webinar here. So the first question that we're going to address to both Claudia and Rebecca is from Janet, and it is, when did you begin to learn and how did your personal style develop? So Rebecca, I will bring this to you first.
Okay. I actually first became interested in weaving, and tapestry is a weaving technique. When I lived in Reno, Nevada, a very long time ago, and I learned everything I knew about fiber from the ladies at the Reno Fiber Guild. And at some point, I was done with Reno, and I moved home to New Mexico and started taking classes in traditional Rio Grande weaving. And if you don't know what that is, it's Hispanic-based weaving done in northern New Mexico, much of New Mexico, and it comes from a lot of traditions from Mexico, sort of Spanish-based weaving. And I was in that program starting in 2004, and I met James Kohler, who is a contemporary tapestry weaver, during that program, and ended up taking a class with him in the summer of 2005. And I dropped out of the program after that and started studying with James because he was doing something that I really was interested in doing myself. And I studied with him and then became his apprentice until he died in 2011. And I would say that I now live in Colorado, but I've spent most of my life living in New Mexico, and I think that my style of weaving is heavily influenced by both the Hispanic and Navajo traditions, but also just by the landscapes of the American Southwest, and also by the specific techniques that I learned from James, which was a lot about color gradation and sort of subtlety and simple form. So I really love using color gradation. I use a lot of bright colors, although I do dye my own yarn and can dye just about anything I want, which is fun. And I guess in my work, I really strive to ask questions and have the viewer ask questions when they see what I'm doing. And I'm looking forward to what I'm going to be doing in the future in my work. I really think I'd like to try using some new materials, some new dye processes, and I think even some different imagery. Where it's going to be interesting what happens in the next few years.
All right, and Claudia, do you want to?
I started being interested in tapestry when I was pregnant with Elena. I randomly took a workshop. I was living in San Francisco and showed up. They had some rigid heddle looms, which are awful for tapestry. And it seemed like this group of people had been together for a long time, and the class was just about them getting together and weaving and talking and having fun, which was great. But for a beginning weaver, it wasn't. The education wasn't really happening. And they were also dyeing wool there, and they're using natural dyes, but they were using mordants that were heavy metals. And I realized by class 2 that natural dyes weren't so safe when you were pregnant. So that was my introduction to tapestry. I then went and bought my own rigid heddle loom and proceeded to teach myself, which was kind of in a vacuum since there wasn't a lot out there then about tapestry. There weren't a lot of books. So I feel that I almost invented tapestry. I thought I was inventing tapestry, which means that rather than learn something important in one day, you make a year of mistakes before you figure it out. So that was pretty much my journey, and then I worked really hard at it, and finally started showing my work and selling it, and that was wonderful. Learned how to spin and dye yarn and all that, which. And then I started Mirrix, and I have to tell you that although I still weave tapestry, my interest is more in color and dyeing and painting and making kits for Mirrix and weaving when I have a chance. Not nearly as much as Rebecca, unfortunately. I wish I could. Someday I will again, I'm sure. I've been very interested to steal every moment I can to weave again. So that's where I'm at.
All right. So now another question for both of you. And I think this is a really great question because when you just start out, getting interested in tapestry, it seems really hard to figure out how you design a tapestry. Where do you start? Do you start with a picture? Do you start with an image? Do you start with colors? Do you start with yarn? How do you put it all together? And so I want to give this question to both of you: is how do each of you go about designing a tapestry? Rebecca, we'll go you first.
Sure. That's a really big question, but it's also really simple because it takes time. I think the answer for me is that it takes a lot of time. And if I don't allow an idea to sit around in my brain for a lot, like it could be a year even or two that something kind of marinates in there, it's it's not going to be a good design. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but for me, it always starts with some kind of pattern that I see somewhere, and I take a lot of photographs. I take weird photographs of, you know, walls and floors and shadows and things like that just kind of spark something in my head about putting those forms together into something that could be woven. But I have to say it takes a long time for that to kind of gel. I use a lot of basic sketches and tracing paper, actually. I often do things in layers. You would think I would use Photoshop or something that is an easy program to use layers with, but I find that the photographs themselves have too much information. And I get bogged down in trying to, how am I going to put all of that information into a tapestry, which is, you can't do that in tapestry. Doing photorealistic stuff is really difficult. And I think that's where a lot of people get frustrated because they're trying to read things that are too complicated. So for me, taking it away from a photograph to a sketch or layers of tracing paper, I often will just have line drawings and then I will have different forms on different layers and I'll move them around until I see something I like and then I trace it off into a design and then I let it sit around for a few months and then I work on it again. So I guess that honestly that's what I do mostly with paper and pencil. And then when I have a finished design and I've been thinking about colors the whole time, I will decide on a size and I'll take it down to Kinko's and they'll blow it up to whatever size I'm going to weave it. And then I use that black and white cartoon under the warp, and then I start sampling the colors and figuring out from there how the colors are going to go. Yeah, so that's kind of, it's pretty basic.
Do you have an idea of what yarn you're going to use when you start designing? I
do. Well, I have an idea of the colors, and I pretty much always use the same yarn. I think there are a lot of tapestry weavers who are, very particular about using one particular yarn or fiber for the whole piece, and then a lot of other people will mix cotton and rayon and different fibers with different light reflective tendencies. So I always use a single yarn that's wool, and it's all the same. So that never changes for me, but the colors change a lot. So, but as I'm designing it, the colors are in the back of my head, which way I'm going to go with them. And sometimes I have to dye a whole bunch that I don't end up using because when I sample them, I always sample them on a Mirax. If I'm not weaving the whole piece on a Mirax, I sample to see how the colors are going to go together. So that definitely evolves with the actual design.
Interesting. All right, Claudia.
Oh, wow. Okay. This is a fun one, but wow. I work in themes. Once I finally had a grasp of tapestry, I think that took me at least several years to know enough techniques and feel comfortable enough that I could actually create pieces that were mine. And I had been looking at other people's tapestries. As few, you couldn't find a lot then, okay? This was 25 years ago. No, actually it was 30 years ago. But once I got my own style, I'd work in themes. For example, at one point, I decided that I was going to weave pieces with a black background and diamonds. Everything was going to be a diamond shape that would all go together and flow in this certain way. I must have woven 10 tapestries with that theme. And it's kind of fun, Rebecca. I don't know if you do this when you come up with a theme and then you just weave and weave one tapestry after another.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, until you're done. And then one day you're done and it's like, okay, and then I have to think of something else. And so I've had a bunch of those things during my journey where I would just weave something for a year until I was sick of it. At one point I wove a bunch of symbols that would actually look realistic. You put the symbols together. That was a blast. So, when it's successful, it's great. You just don't want to stop doing it because it works. I do sketches, but I don't do cartoons. I do mark my warp. I draw on my warp to outline shapes. My work is very material driven because 20 years ago, I learned how to process yarn, dye it in the wool, and spin it. So rather than using yarn that I had dyed and would put, would blend in the weft several strands, I would actually spin all those colors into a yarn. So if I wanted a yellowish green, it would be from fiber that was yellow, green, whatever, and then combed together and spun. So my tapestries started to become very, very material driven. I would look at the stuff I had spun and get ideas for what I was going to weave. So that's basically where I ended up, you know, creating my own materials. Now, I think a lot of you know I've been obsessed with painting silk. So almost everything I weave now is woven from hand-painted silk, and I assume someday I might get sick of that, but I don't see that anytime soon.
Okay, so this is actually a great transition. This was the question that was asked the most in different ways by our participants, our viewers, listeners of the webinar, and that is, what warp and weft materials do you suggest? We'll start with you again, Rebecca.
Sure. It's a big question, which is probably why everybody asked it. I was taught by James Kohler, and if you know James Kohler, you know he was very particular, and I did sort of inherit some of that belief that, especially when you're starting out, it's really helpful to, in your first few pieces at least, stick with one thing, because so many different fibers act very differently. A knitting yarn does not act like a tapestry yarn, and so you can't just substitute some yarn that you find at Walmart for some other kind of yarn and expect to get the same result. So all that said, I use cotton warp, and I guess the main warps that you could use are cotton, wool, or linen, and I think wool and cotton are the best choice for beginners. But I use cotton partly because it shrinks a lot, and so I steam my pieces when they're done, and the cotton will shrink and tighten everything up, and it makes a nice flat tapestry, which is something that I like. And then for weft, I always use wool, and right now I'm using a singles yarn that's made for me by Harrisville in New Hampshire. So I think they actually source their wool from New Zealand, but it's made in the United States. So, and I actually often recommend that people, Harrisville Highland is a good solid yarn to start with weaving tapestry, but there are many, many, many others that that work well. There are a lot of singles yarns. Patternation is being made again, which is probably the #1 thing that you'll hear people recommend, because it comes in so many colors. So if you don't dye your own yarn, Patternation is something to look into. It's being made again by Saco River Dye House, I think, and you can find it at various needlework shops. I think they sell it in small hanks and in larger skeins. And I like a lot of the Swedish yarns, Norwegian yarns, ones that are stiffer and work better for tapestry. Do you have any other things about that, Claudia?
Yeah, I mean, one of the hard things about finding tapestry yarn in this country, and you have gotten it from Harrisville, and that's really great, is that a lot of the yarn that's made in this country is made for crochet and mostly knitting. And your knitting yarn, you want it to be warm and fuzzy, like merino, which is soft and warm and very short fibers. And that has a whole different reason for existing than a tapestry yarn. A tapestry yarn the fibers should be very long as possible. It should be very shiny, and it should just soak up the dye so that the colors are brilliant. Whereas a short staple, they don't do the colors as well. So when I started to learn how to spin, I was getting specific sheeps, Wensleydale or Cotswold, the sheeps where their hair hangs down to the ground, and those produce the best tapestry yarns. In countries like Norway or Sweden, they make their tapestry yarns from these particular sheep. They really care about their sheep. Whereas in America, if you just go to a yarn store and it doesn't tell you what it is, I call them mono yarns. They just throw any, whatever wool they can find in, because that's all they need to do. So ideally, if you want these certain qualities, you want it to be beautiful. And I guess when you talk about materials, besides the warp, which is very important, you want to get the best warp possible, because it is the framework of your tapestry, and you don't want it to fail you. But in terms of the yarn you use, yeah, you don't want to go to Walmart and pick up some acrylic. That's not going to make your tapestry beautiful, because that is not beautiful. You want to use stuff that's gorgeous, that you want to look at forever. And you know, that's a journey. Trying to find that is not always so easy. When I began weaving, like Rebecca, I would just buy literally pounds and pounds and pounds and pounds of undyed rug wool, and I dye it myself, because I didn't want the red that the yarn stores were promoting that year. I wanted 20 different reds. So I guess it's like any art form where you want your materials to be the best. It takes a lot of practicing, a lot of searching, thank goodness for the internet, and a lot of asking people like Rebecca and me what we do.
So there's another question that I remember a couple people were asking. Can tapestry, is wool the only thing that people use for tapestry, or what other?
No, they use other things, but one of the things, and Rebecca I know will agree with me on this, wool is the one that people use the most, but it's also the most forgiving because it's stretchy. If you decide that you want to weave a tapestry out of linen, which the Coptics used to do, although mainly just for the background because they weren't able to dye the linen, but that's a whole other story. Linen has no stretch whatsoever. So if you really don't have your technique down, you're going to have a really good chance of pulling in. So cotton, linen, and silk are much harder to weave with than wool. I mean, they can be just as beautiful. Do you find this, Rebecca?
Yes, I totally agree with that. I think wool is the easiest for those reasons. But cotton and silk are much more reflective, and so people are attracted to that brilliance of it.
Yeah, using it as an accent, so you can have a reflective with wool around it, which absorbs light, and you know that can be amazing too. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right also about the technique of it. That wool is the most forgiving, and so it's the easiest to start with, and you have to have much better technique to weave well with cotton or silk.
Mm-hmm. Great answer, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so here is a question that we get a lot here at Mirrix. And, you know, it doesn't quite have a cut and dry answer, but how do you know what set to weave in? Claudia, do you want to take this?
I think we were going to ask Rebecca to start on that.
Okay, Rebecca, you want to start?
You always have to start. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you something that Claudia's going to totally tell you the right answer. When it comes to set, I don't follow the same rules that a lot of people do, and there are really great ways to figure out your set that include yarn wrapping and all kinds of things. I actually use a warp that is probably, a lot of people would say, is too small for the set that I use. I weave at 8 or 10 inch, and I use a 12/6 cotton warp, which is quite thin. And a lot of tapestry weavers use much fatter warp than I do. And the reason I use that thin warp partly is because that's how I learned, but it creates a thinner fabric, and I really am going for a specific thin fabric that hangs on the wall and sort of moves with the, you know, it looks like a textile on the wall. And it's an aesthetic choice that I've made, I think. But I think that there are probably guidelines that people use for beginners that are a little. And Claudia can tell you about those.
Well, what just came to mind too is if you use a thicker warp, you'd have thicker ridges, or you would have ridges in your weaving,
exactly.
And you want to avoid that. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me, though. So screw the rules, okay? I guess this really takes experimentation. Just like everything in tapestry, you don't wake up one day and you suddenly have all the answers, and even if someone gives them to you, they might not be the right answers for you. But the rule sort of is this. Okay, so you have your warp and you have your weft, and you want them to be in correct relationship with one another. Because if your warp is too widely spaced and your weft is too thin, you're just going to be pounding down forever. It's going to take you, a lifetime to weave, because it's just going to get pushed down. I'm just going to tell you a little story because this is so dumb. When I also got that rigid heddle loom and started to weave tapestry, at some point I paused and wove 9 scarves that I gave away that Christmas. Remember, I was pregnant and could be forgiven for anything. And I had this beautiful alpaca, and I was thinking tapestry. I was thinking, well, if I want to make a really lacy, thin scarf, if I space the warp really widely, it will make it really lacy. Okay? This is exactly the opposite. I wound up with a tapestry scarf. It was the densest thing you've ever, and I sent it to my forefather who lives in France, and he never said thank you, and now I know why. But basically, you want, the rule of thumb is this. So you have your warps on the loom, and you take your weft yarn that you want to use, either singles or maybe several plies, and you take that and you put it in between the warps that are on the loom. If that weft yarn is basically fills in that space, it's not too big for it, not too small, that relationship is probably going to be correct. And I think, Rebecca, it doesn't matter if you're using a 612 or 912. As long as that weft fills up that space, you're okay.
Well, yeah, what you said, the rigid heddle is important, that people realize that tapestry set is wider than it would be for weaving fabric.
Exactly, because a scarf would be an even weave, and you want everything. You want them to be an equal relationship. Whereas a tapestry, you want the relationship to be that the weft shows. So you definitely are going to err toward having your warp threads more widely spaced for tapestry.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I thought that was a pretty good answer between the two of us, even though neither of us wanted to do it.
It is pretty good. Good work.
I mean, and when you think about it, just to kind of simplify this a little bit, what you want when you're weaving tapestry is for your warp threads not to show. That's one thing.
That's really important.
Right. Because it is weft-faced weaving. So keep that in mind. If you start weaving and you can see you can also go in the other direction, but if you start weaving, you can see your warp threads, then something is wrong.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. We didn't address. I mean, yes, because if your warp is too thick and your weft is too thick and then your warp is too close together, that's when you're going to start to see that warp when you don't want to see it, and that's even more of a problem than having your weft get too packed down. Really. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a problem I hear of a lot from our customers, and the solution is to change your set or what you're weaving with. So, okay, we're going to go on to
Can I just add one more thing?
Yes.
Because, Rebecca, you're a knitter. And don't you think that people should just do little test pieces on their loom before they go full ahead on a piece, put up that 10 warp threads and test your weft and see what your set should be before you...
Yeah, people should always do that, but they never do. It's like you don't ever do a knit swatch. But if you're trying a new material for tapestry, you definitely should do a swatch, basically, to see if it works or not. Or at least in the waist on your piece, weave enough to know whether it's going to work or not.
Yeah, that's actually a really great tip. And that's not something I've been telling customers to do, but it's a really good idea. Weave a swatch, do some testing. And you can also, we have a place on our website where we kind of have a crowdsourced list where people say, okay, I made this tapestry, it turned out great. This was the warp I used, this was the weft I used, this was the set I used. And as a beginner, it's helpful to look at a chart like that. It's helpful to look at, a sampler where they tell you what set and what yarns to use, or a project to follow that someone else has already done. When you're a beginner, it's nice to do that, because that will help you start to understand
and then
how it works.
Intuitively will know how to do it. It will make a lot of sense. In the future, you won't have to sample as much. You'll just know.
Right.
Yeah, it's great. When you have a Claudia around, you can just be like, I want to use this. What set should I use?
Not a Rebecca around too.
Or a Rebecca. But I guess not all of you have that. So the next question, and this is, again, a question we get all the time. And I'd say, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but probably keeping selvages straight is the hardest thing for beginning tapestry weavers. If you look at a piece, most people's first pieces, they go in the middle, because pulling in on your edges, so your selvages are your edges, I should have explained that. So the question is, what tips do you guys have to keep the selvages of a piece straight and the warps evenly spaced throughout?
And we're actually going to let Rebecca answer that all by herself, because once you answer it, there's no need for me to say anything. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, I have to say, and I've been teaching beginning tapestry for a long time now, and this is absolutely the #1 frustration that people have. And so there are some fairly simple relationships that once you understand can really help figure out why you're having problems with the selvages and the warp spacing. It's really a foundational tapestry skill, being able to keep your warps evenly spaced and your selvages straight. And I should maybe even mention that learning tapestry is something that takes a ton of practice. It's not something that you can learn in your first sampler, and I would not expect anybody to weave a first piece or sample that has straight selvages. So you have to give yourself a break on that. The professional tapestry weavers who weave at the big workshops like the Dovecot have 7-year apprenticeships. So before they can weave on the big pieces. So you have to give yourself a little time there to learn this, because you have to learn it in your hands and your fingers, and not just in your head. It takes a while for all of that memory to build up. The secret to the straight selvages has to do with weft tension. So we always talk about warp tension, and we want tight warps on our looms and all of this stuff. But the secret is really not so much the warp tension, although it makes a huge difference if you're a beginner especially, but the weft tension, which just means how much weft you're putting into the warp. If you put too much weft in, eventually your warps will start to push apart, and then the edges of your tapestry will bulge out. So you know how that happens, where your thing is 2 inches wider than when you started. And if you don't put enough weft in, the warps will draw together and your edges will draw in, and eventually your fell line will actually rise up. Because if the warps draw together, there isn't enough room for those wefts to go over and under all of those warps. And then it starts to build up and you get a mountain. And that's one of the most frustrating things I see that students do. So just knowing that basic relationship can really help keep your selvages straight. And the secret is really to watch how far apart your warps are. If they're drying together, you have to put in more weft. If they're pushing apart, you have to put in less weft. And it's just a fact of physics of the matter, but it's counterintuitive, because when the warps start to dry together, people start to put in less and less weft, and then the problem gets worse. So when you see them drying together, you put in a great big bubble. So that's to keep the selvages straight, it's all about the bubbling, which is what I mean by that is when you make the little hills across your tapestry, to get in enough weft, you have to get those hills the right size so that the amount of weft you need actually goes in there. So that's straight selvages 101.
I have a question for you, Rebecca. Some people, when they discovered that their warps are unevenly spaced, too widely spaced on the outside, too closely spaced on the inside, causing that mountain, they put in twining to try to correct that. Have you ever done that, or do you recommend doing that?
I have never done that. I really recommend, first of all, knowing to watch for that spacing issue and to try to fix it right away. You could put in twining, but you would see it in the piece.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they remove it eventually. But yeah, in your pieces where everything has to be flat and perfect, it would not work.
Well, and it might help pull them back out if you combine the twining with actually putting in more weft in the areas that need it. It might work. Yeah.
So basically watch as you go along and just be really aware that your selvages are not going in or out. I mean, that's the most important thing. And don't be too hard on yourself if it happens, because you have 7 years to learn it.
Well, and here's the truth is that if you ask any professional tapestry weaver to think about it, they would be doing it automatically all the time. It's not that if you're a professional, your warps are always perfect. You're just adjusting all the time. Right. So it's not something you'll ever stop doing, just a fact of the medium.
And do you sometimes draw in or get wider in your pieces, Rebecca?
Oh, do I? No, never. I'm perfect.
Oh, I am too.
I actually, one of my earlier pieces, this was about, I don't know, 9 years ago or something, was a big piece, and I wove a big circle in the middle, and I didn't know about having a lot of butterflies. When you have a band at the bottom and the top, which we frequently do in designs that are all one color, you still need to have a lot of butterflies because it keeps your spacing even.
Right.
And I dropped the number of butterflies a lot on this piece, and so I had this huge drawing at the top and the bottom. It was a big piece. It took me months to weave. And I was weaving it on a Rio Grande standing loom, which has a huge high tension, so I didn't really realize that this was happening until I got it off the loom. And I was so disappointed. It's the only tapestry I've ever done this to, but I blocked it. Okay. I actually made a big blocking frame out of 2x4s, and I blocked the thing. And it looks lovely now, but if it ever got wet again, it would be an egg. So yes, I'm not always perfect.
Oh, okay. I'm not either.
Nobody is. And you don't have to be either.
Yeah.
That was a really great answer. And just one thing to add, like from the perspective of not a professional, is sometimes you can't tell when you're pulling in. So be conscious, but also measure all the time.
Yeah, measuring tapes are a really cool tool.
Because it's incredibly easy to weave up a couple inches and think that you're totally even, and then you measure and you're like, oh, no, I'm not.
Oh, half an inch. Yes, measure every half an inch.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so that was a wonderful answer. Okay, so we're gonna go on to some more questions. These are some specific questions from people taking the webinar. So Diana asked, and I thought this was an amazing question, what tapestry artists are known for breaking the rules of tapestry? By this, I mean the use of art yarns, textures, and dimensional shapes. So we're going to tackle this. Claudia is going to do one, and Rebecca is going to do the other. Rebecca, you want to start?
Sure. I think this is a fantastic and interesting question because I think it's easy to slip into this mindset where everything has to be square and perfect in a certain way. And we need to remember that we're making something that's a craft or an art that is expressing something inside of us, and it doesn't have to be a particular way. It could be something very different than what we've seen before, and that would be awesome. So Helena Kernmark is one person I thought of who kind of broke a tapestry mold a little bit, and I really recommend going to her website and looking at her work. It's phenomenal. It's almost all huge, large-scale tapestry. It's very, very heavy. Some of her pieces weigh, I don't know, probably 100 pounds. A lot of yarn in there. I took a workshop with her in 2012 in Minneapolis at the American Swedish Institute, and she had a huge show there, so I was able to listen to her talk about all of these pieces, and then she also taught us how she does her technique. So her technique is different than just West-based tapestry. She actually has a 5-pick sequence where she has the regular tapestry sequence with like a small diameter yarn that would cover its warp. She has a sequence of a very thin linen yarn that helps to stabilize the whole piece. And then there's this 5th sequence of a really, really fat bundle of yarn that is looped on the surface, almost like a sumac. And so she's creating 2 layers where the plain tapestry creates a form underneath, and then this fat yarn goes on top, and so she's playing between those 2 layers with fitting dimension. And by changing the colors of the fat yarn on top and the thinner yarn underneath, she can really create some amazing things. You look at some of the pieces on her website, you won't even believe that they're not 3-dimensional, that they're actually flat tapestry. So I think she's a really great example of someone who does that, and someone who's worked for her entire professional life doing corporate commissions and selling large-scale work. She's really an inspiration, and I think she's still working. She's my example.
Would you call she does photorealism, correct?
She does. Actually, she was showing us this piece that she made that's in the American Swedish Institute in Minneapolis. You can go and see it. She took a photograph of it's a little part of a skirt, and she made a fabric of a fabric. But she spent days and days and days arranging and trying to get the exact right photograph, because she works exactly from photographs, which is something that, like I said before, I would never do, but that is how she works, and probably part of how she gets that amazing three-dimensional thing happening.
Yeah,
Wow.
I love her work.
I would love to see that in person.
Well, go to Minneapolis. It's fantastic.
Hey, go to Minneapolis. You have a friend there.
I do. All right, guys, I'm going. Okay, Claudia.
I am going to talk about Sylvia Hayden. Sylvia, she doesn't actually break any rules at all, but she manipulates techniques in her own way to create, interestingly enough, Rebecca, a lot of her tapestries seem three-dimensional too, because of the way she manipulates her techniques. She works a lot with eccentric wefts. Now, if you don't know what eccentric wefts are, you're not weaving on the fell line, you're weaving your wefts at an angle. You know, you can create a traditional, and this is not what she does, you could create like a mountain of wefts, you know, getting smaller and smaller, and then outline it with a weft that would go around the curve, and that would be called an eccentric weft. But her eccentric wefts tend to be on angles, and they're pretty steep angles. And her warps do get distorted in this process. If you look at her stuff up close, it's not this neat great little joins and stuff. It's kind of a little messier. But so what she originally started working with were a combination of triangles and half rounds, and she would combine them for the dynamic that would happen between them. And then she started adding diagonal lines and striped diagonal lines and striped woven pieces at angles to each other, and really amazing color transformations. She basically wanted to have her tapestries sing, and they do sing. Ultimately, and I unfortunately I couldn't find pictures of the tapestries I really wanted to show on the internet, because Sylvia did not have a website. Although there is a documentary about her. If you do search for her, you can see her documentary, and that's great. What ultimately she did was she said, forget about the straight selvages either on the top or the side. So, and she would have pieces that would look like almost two tapestries, one laid upon the other. So her selvages got not at all messy. They were controlled to be the way they were, but they really informed the tapestry itself. The edges, the selvages informed what was in the tapestry as well. I had the honor of speaking to her once. She died a few years ago, Rebecca? Do you remember?
She died this year.
This year, okay. So it was like 4 or 5, 6 years ago, she called me up to order a Mirrix loom. Now, normally she weaves on large floor looms. And what she wanted it for was she had a good friend who was a potter. And she wanted to teach this potter, and people keep saying, why a potter? She wanted to teach this potter how to weave tapestry. She wanted to teach this potter her techniques, so that when she died, her techniques would not go with her. And I assume she was successful in that. So that is my spiel on one of my favorite tapestry artists. Actually, these two are my two favorites. Besides Rebecca, she's right there.
Her movie is called A Weaverly Path. And the website's aweaverlypath.com, and I really recommend watching that video.
So do you guys think, because tapestry is such a rule-based art form, are there not a whole lot of examples of people who break the rules? Because then, you know, that's not tapestry. You know, how do you guys feel about that?
I'll answer that first. I think the definition of tapestry got really, really strict, and it was in reaction to the 60s when everything was called a tapestry. You know, a macrame was called tapestry. Anything you did, you could call it a tapestry. And then people got really serious about what was and wasn't a tapestry. And the American Tapestry Alliance was born. And I don't know about the Canadian Tapestry Network, if it had already been around. But people started to really get serious about it. So some of those people would even tell you that Helena, right, Rebecca, was not following the rules, and maybe her stuff wasn't really tapestry. I disagree with that completely. What I feel about tapestry, and I know Rebecca agrees, is that, yeah, you need to learn all the rules, and you need to get darn good at it. And then you can break them, but you have to break them in a very conscious way. Not a, I'm breaking it because I just want to plow through this, and oh, some warp showed, I don't really care. You have to want that warp to show. There has to be a reason for it. Everything you do needs to have a real specific reason. It needs to be planned. And I guess, you know, I think I am a little snobby about definitions of tapestry, but I also think that breaking the rules is okay if that, like with Sylvia, I mean, when you look at her writings, I mean, she is so clear about why she's doing what she's doing, and so is Helena. There's an absolute reason for it. Okay, that's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's right on, that there are a lot of, quote, rules about what tapestry is and isn't, but I think it's good to know what the rules are before you decide to break them. And why there are rules. The rules are to teach you how the structure works. And once you learn all of that, then you can do whatever you want. It's your art. But I think it is good to start with.
That's the same with any medium. I mean, if you want to learn how to throw a pot and you want to make a crooked one, you really need to learn how to throw a centered one first. And the same thing with, you know, watercolor and using the right materials and using the right techniques, and then you can do whatever you want. The same stuff applies to tapestry.
Yeah.
All right, great answers,
we have
guys.
opinions on that, don't we?
We
do. So, and then our next question is from Elizabeth, and she asks, how many different kinds of looms are there? And we're going to go to Claudia for this.
Okay, in terms of tapestry looms, there are two major types, and I was going to go into horrible detail about it, but I really don't want to put you to sleep, and it is at the end of the webinar. Basically, you have a simple frame loom, which can be anything from, you know, 4 pieces of wood nailed together, and you just wrap your warp around it, or you throw some nails in it, and doesn't have a shedding device or a tensioning device, you know, kind of like what kids start off with, or what you might start off with before you want to invest in a loom. But then you're really going to have to move in a different direction, because those looms will not make you happy. So there have been a lot of simple frame looms. For example, the Navajo loom is a simple frame loom. They took originally, you know, 3 huge branches, you know, tied them, lashed them together, prepared their warp off the loom, then put it on the loom and tensioned it, and then created a very simple shedding device, which is a stick heddles and a shedding stick. And then when they had to move, they took the weaving off the loom, went somewhere else, and, you know, glued together some trees. So these very simple frame looms, Mirrix is a simple frame loom with a ton of bells and whistles to give it tension and a shedding device. So the basic frame loom is what tapestry, you know, is the building block of one kind of tapestry loom. Then you have the more complicated looms, like the Gobelin looms and the countermarch looms, the counterbalance looms, those big, awesome, you know, or the looms that are used for Aubusson tapestry. Those huge looms, Rebecca has one in her studio, that you know, have complicated shedding devices and treadles and more, you know, just more like the looms that you think of when you think of a loom, but dedicated to tapestry, so designed so that they work for tapestry. There are 2 looms that I recommend you not get for tapestry, and one is a jack loom, although some people can use it. They're made for making material. So if you want one of those big looms, you need a counterbalance or a countermarch, in my opinion. And don't get a rigid heddle loom to weave tapestry. I did that for the first 2 years that I wove, and I got really good at weaving because I was weaving on an inappropriate loom. So when I finally got a floor loom, tapestry loom, I was amazed at how much easier it was. Rigid heddle looms are great for weaving scarves, not so good for tapestry. And that's what I have to say about that.
All right, great answer. Okay, our next question comes from, looks like we lost Rebecca, but our next question comes from Stacy, and it is, do you care what the back of your tapestry looks like? So we're going to start with Claudia here, and I'm going to get Rebecca back on the line.
Okay. Do I care about what the back of my tapestry looks like? No, because I think what's really interesting, I love to look at the backs of people's tapestry because they're so interesting to see how it happens. But I don't care. Some people do weave in the backs, the wefts, and are much more particular about it than I am. But you know, that is how I feel. I think Rebecca probably has more of an opinion about that. Rebecca, I was saying that I don't care about what the back of my tapestry looks like at all.
You don't care about what?
What the back of my tapestry looks like.
Oh,
You know, I don't weave
okay.
in the ends. I just trim them, and then I put, you know, edging, some kind of twill tape on the sides of my tapestry so that the ends don't fly out. But that's all I do. I think, yeah. What do you think?
I think that's very, very common. I think Archie Brennan would say that tapestry is a one-sided fabric, and it doesn't matter what the back looks like. So there are, you know, many schools about that, and I'm one of the people who has a really clean back. That's partly probably because I learned in the American Southwest, and so think about like Navajo textiles or Rio Grande textiles you've seen, they're clean on the side. And so that is very pervasive in the American Southwest or New Mexico where I learned. I like the thin, you know, fabric that I get because I don't have all that extra fiber on the back. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure it matters a whole lot. I think that there's something nice about weaving from the front and just sticking your ends to the back and never thinking about them again. So
yeah, I guess it.
I'm not as picky as I used to be about it. I mean, I am for myself, but I don't think it's worth insisting that someone do it my way because there's not a lot of. I'm not sure it matters that much. Well,
like with the Navajo tapestry, what they would do is they would break their thread and they would weave. You know, one thread would end and would have a broken. It would come to a point, and then the other thread would start overlapping that. So it was always a two-sided tapestry because they were functional items. There were blankets and rugs and stuff. So,
right.
But if you're doing something like, I bet Helena's tapestries on the back are pretty wild.
Yeah, they're very wild.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this is one last question. And I think this is a great way to end. After this, we're going to talk a little bit about some more tapestry resources. But the last question was from Julia, and it was, how can we make tapestry relevant in our time? So Rebecca, I'll go to you first.
Okay. I think this is a really fantastic question, and your answer might depend a little bit on why you want to do it, but I think that making art is always relevant. I just think that the medium we use to make a statement is maybe not as important as the statement being made to me. So I'm focused on making a piece of art that says something, but I don't know that I think there's people weave tapestry for a lot of different ways, for a lot of different reasons, and I also think that just making things with our hands is incredibly important. I think that we live in a world that's filled with more and more electronics and more devices that sort of get in the way of us actually making something. And I think going back to creating something with materials that we can feel and manipulate is really important for us as humans. And I do think that weaving can connect people in social ways and communicate, you know, when your art or your craft is used by other people. But in the end, at least for me, I'm kind of a process weaver, and one of the most important things to me is just the process of making. And I think that feeds my life in a lot of ways that is totally relevant to me and hopefully is a relevant practice for us in the world. So I guess that's what I'd say.
That's a great answer. Claudia?
Wow, this is a can full of worms, and I guess I could launch on this for hours, but and I'm going to, you know, get into a little feminism, I think, while I'm here. But, yeah, remember, tapestry's been around, we know, for at least 3,000 years. But the problem with tapestry is it's not a problem, but it is a fiber art. And, well, I think oil painting is a fiber art because you paint on fiber, but that's another story. And it is something that has kind of gotten more and more relegated to females, just like knitting or quilt making or embroidery, even though there are people doing this incredible high art in all these mediums. When you start talking about fiber, it somehow, it gets diminished somehow. And I'm hoping that that goes away. Now, remember that quote I told you, that oil painting is the poor man's tapestry. I would love to have that come back again. I would love to see huge tapestry exhibits, you know, instead of oil painting exhibits, or in addition to. And that hasn't happened yet. And I'm hoping that this resurgence in interest in tapestry will bring it back. You know, you ever hear, you know, it's funny because there are certain politically correct things you cannot say in a society, but you can say things like, I see this when I watch movies sometimes. Oh, my life is just terrible. I guess I'll just become one of those women who knits, you know, or one of those women who crochets or weaves or something. And it seems like every time they refer to women doing some kind of fire art, it's in this really negative way. Or I lost my boyfriend, so now I'm going to knit my sorrows away or eat chocolate cake, you know. And I kind of just get really angry because, like Rebecca, I can't not use my hands. I cannot go a day without making something or think about making something. I'm obsessed about it, and it makes me as sane as I am, which maybe isn't that sane. But I do think we need to move up and forward, and so that everybody has a chance to do this and realizes that it's such a relief from everything else that's going on in this world, from our computers and our crazy lives. It's kind of a savior in a lot of ways. And I would like to see, and I think more and more people, Rebecca, don't you feel like more and more people are doing it? Probably more women than men, but
yes,
doing
yes,
fine
I do think so. And I'm seeing a wide age range of people too. Everyone, I have a student who just turned 90, and I have students who are 20. So I love to see that.
I think one of your points, Claudia, was really good, is that, you know, we live in this world that is so filled with technology that it is so amazing to sit down and weave and not be on a computer and not be on a phone and not be looking at some kind of screen, that I wonder if crafts like tapestry, art forms like tapestry, are going to continue having more of a resurgence because of that. As we need to get away from this technology. We need ways to express ourselves that have nothing to do with computers. So I wonder if the millennials, if the younger generation is going to really start taking an interest in this for that reason.
Well, maybe if more of us weave in public. Rebecca, we need to do that.
Okay.
Because in public, I tend to knit or crochet or embroider, but, you know, I should just like go out and weave in public, you know?
Yeah, yeah. We can do it. We'll have a weave in.
We'll have a weave in.
A weave out.
A weave out. There we go.
Okay, so that is all for our questions. We're a little bit over, but I just wanted to talk about some tapestry resources. Now, listening to this webinar, you might be a little bit intimidated by tapestry because it is an incredible art form that takes years and years to perfect, but it is so worth it. And you can always start at the beginning. You know, it's easy for a beginner to start. Your pieces might not be perfect at the beginning, but it's easy to begin. And there are a lot of great resources out there to help you begin. There are some wonderful books like Tapestry 101 by Kathy Todd Hooker. There's Tapestry Weaving, a Comprehensive Study Guide by Nancy Harvey. There's the Tapestry Handbook by Carol Russell. There's also another book I like because I think the pictures are really clear for beginners, is Tapestry Weaving by Kirsten Glassbrook. This is not in print right now, but is going to be in print again by the beginning of next year, I think.
We hope, we think.
We hope.
They hope so, yeah.
So any one of those books will really help you get started. There are also many in-person classes all over the country. This, you know, I'm focusing on America a little bit, but in any country, well, many countries, you'll find some great workshops. One place, if you're looking in America, if you go to the American Tapestry Alliance, which is americantapestryalliance.org, they have tons of great tapestry weaving resources in general. They have articles, they have all sorts of things. They also have a great list of tapestry teachers. You can go and look at your area and see if there is a teacher there. But you can also Google it. and see if there's someone teaching near you, because
and join it. The American Tapestry Alliance is such a gift. I've been involved with them for about 25 years, and they're amazing, and we really need to support them because we need to have them around.
Yeah, the ATA is amazing.
Yeah.
And another option, and I just think it is amazing that Rebecca is doing the online class that she was talking about before, because it really kind of gives you the best of both worlds. You have a class that in many ways can feel like an online class. You're getting personal instruction. There's somebody you can talk to and ask questions. But if you don't have a class that happens to be around you, an online class is such a wonderful option. And it helps, some people don't like learning from books. An online class is such a wonderful way to learn. So definitely check out Rebecca's class, go to her website. We're gonna send you an email that will have a link to her website so you can learn a little bit more about that class. But if you're interested in tapestry, that is definitely a great option.
Plus, it's only gotten rave reviews. Okay, I mean that's the fact. Okay, no one's ever said anything but wonderful things about it.
This is true.
I wish you had been around doing this, and the internet was around when I started, Rebecca.
All right. So that's it. We are all done. Thank you for listening to us talk, and thank you, Claudia and Rebecca.